This is the BioCentury Show. The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the second BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit. Join us October 2nd to 4th in Kendall Square to debate how to globalize biopharma innovation to benefit patients and achieve an ROI for investors.
I'm Steve Usdin, and I'm speaking today with Peter Marks, Director of FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. As CBER Director, Dr. Marks is responsible for ensuring the safety and efficacy of some of the most advanced and important medicines, from vaccines to gene and cell therapies. His influence on policy goes far beyond FDA's campus. One example, Dr. Marks came up with the name for Operation Warp Speed. I'm not sure if I should thank him or register a complaint for that. And he helped design the project, and his policies have shaped U.S. pandemic response. So there's a lot to talk about today. Dr. Marks, we're recording this conversation on May 10. Tomorrow, the public health emergency ends. COVID's killed 1.2 million Americans and about 22 million people worldwide. Scientists polled by the White House think there's a 20% chance of COVID mutating in the next year into something that's far more deadly than it is today. And it's only a matter of time before another virus with pandemic potential emerges. Given all that background, I think there should be massive efforts to prepare for what's going to come, to improve ventilation in public buildings, create new generation vaccines, build massive diagnostics capacity, and a lot more things. And I don't see it happening. It looks like, with the exception of mRNA vaccine manufacturing capacity, we aren't much better off than we were 3 years ago. Am I wrong? Is the U.S. doing all it can and should to prepare for the inevitable?
So I'd say that we've learned some things from this pandemic that I think we can carry with us, and we are trying to carry with us moving forward. But perhaps we haven't learned enough from this pandemic. So I think I would have to say that there is an element of truth into what you are saying. We have learned where our strengths are in our ability to respond, and we've learned where our weaknesses are. And although I think we'll be better off in our ability to ramp up production of certain countermeasures, and we'll be better off in understanding how we have to go about investigating things in the event of a new threat, I think that we probably have not risen to the occasion of what we need to do to improve manufacturing, both in the United States and globally, in order to address what is almost certainly going to be a succession of new infectious disease threats that will occur over the coming years, either on a somewhat more local scale and an epidemic scale in a given nation or continent, or in a pandemic scale across the globe. So, point well taken, that this could be a missed opportunity if we don't rise to the occasion, because we're all too excited to move on right now.
Yeah, and the ending of the public health emergency seems to be an opportunity. People are just saying, okay, woof, we're glad that's over with, and that we're not doing what needs to be done. Where are we heading with COVID vaccines? Is it going to turn into an annual shot with FDA selecting a strain similar to the flu? Or what?
I think we're very likely to end up in a spot where we are going to have a situation like influenza vaccine here, where indeed we will have an annual strain selection and an annual updated vaccine. I can't say that with 100% certainty, because we may end up in a situation, if the virus keeps changing very rapidly, that we might have to update it more frequently. But we're going to try to avoid having to do that, because we know that people start to get whiplash if there's more than one vaccine per year. So the hope here is to get to good rather than to perfect, which is to get everyone to have some protection against the worst outcomes by getting vaccinated annually, much the same way as they get an annual influenza vaccine, in order to protect them through the worst part of the year, which is in the Northern Hemisphere here, those winter months when people go indoors. And we have at the same time as COVID-19 or SARS coronavirus 2, influenza and respiratory syncytial virus all circulating around, potentially helping to fill up hospitals and drain healthcare resources. So
it's been an intense 3 years. And in addition to the workload that you've had, you've come in for a fair amount of criticism. It's not Fauci level criticism maybe, but it's similar to it. What's it been like and how are you holding up?
So someone once told me that if everyone hates what you're doing in the federal government, it means you're doing your job really well. So I feel like I'm doing my job really well most days. All kidding aside, I can sleep well at night because I know that we have always tried to do our best with the data that we have available to follow the science as closely as we could, to come to the right recommendations for the American public and for public health globally. And sometimes we haven't gotten it exactly right, and we've had to adjust on the fly. I think perhaps that is a teaching moment for the country, which is that, this is how science works, is you don't get it right always on the first try, but you adjust to get it as right as you possibly can. And at the end of the day, I think, yes, could we have, for instance, rolled out our boosters in a more organized manner to a more appropriate population? Yes, could we have started studying children and pregnant women earlier on? But we did our best as soon as we could. And ultimately, I think the larger problems were less scientific in terms of the type of science that I'm trained in, of biology and chemistry, and more social science issues that we were not fully prepared to address. Although, again, as one of the teaching moments of the pandemic that I don't think has been appreciated, even in the early days of Operation Warp Speed, we recognized that getting vaccine acceptance was going to be a crucial thing to address, and we probably didn't put enough emphasis on that aspect of the vaccination campaign.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. I mentioned to people who work at FDA and people in the biopharma industry that I was going to be interviewing you today. And I asked them, what did they want me to ask you about? And I was surprised. The number one issue that people asked me about wasn't around COVID or gene therapies. It was around management. And they said, ask Dr. Marks, how closely does he coordinate with Dr. Cavazzoni, the leader of the Center for Drugs? How much independence do division directors at CBER have? How much direction does he receive from the office of the commissioner? Can you give some insight into that? When, how much coordination is there between what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and the policies you're making and what's happening at other centers and FDA wide, and how does that work?
Yeah, no, that is a really great question. Let me start. Let me start at kind of at the level, then I'll go up and I'll go down. So I think it's really important for those of us, be it Dr. Cavazzoni or Dr. Shuren, because we have both. We do have some devices and some device issues in our center, and obviously we have biologics that treat the same diseases that some CBER drugs or CBER biologics do. So we try to stay in touch and try to make sure that we are on the same page about things. And I think largely Dr. Cavazzoni and I are very much on the same page with things. How each of us are able to affect change within our organizations is also an issue that we both deal with. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. And so we exchange information over that and essentially best practices. So I think we're trying to coordinate as best we can, acknowledging that there are areas, some might say rare disease endpoints, others like it, where we're not yet to the place that we would like to be, but we're trying. I think from the commissioner's office, I can say that I feel actually kind of lucky that in general, we have not had a prescriptive approach from the commissioner's office, and generally it's been a very supportive one for the initiatives that we've put forward. So I don't feel that I've had pressure or a strong exhortation to be going in any given direction. And then I think from down in terms of how I try to run the organization, my goal is to try to lead by example, by trying to have policies that that allow people to see where we're trying to head, and then giving people the leeway to try to accomplish those goals. That does mean that sometimes things don't happen exactly the way that you might want, but we try to correct and try to guide. So it is a challenge. I mean, having spent a fair number of my past years, even before I came to FDA, trying to manage knowledge workers, it is a bit challenging, and it is a little bit like the proverbial herding cats sometimes. But I think we just have to keep doing our best. And I feel very, very lucky at CBER, because by and large, the group of people that we've had together are among the most amazing people that I've worked with, because they have come together sometimes under tremendous adversity to work literally well into the late nights, day after day, to accomplish things like getting vaccines approved or getting gene therapy packages reviewed that would not have been possible without that type of commitment.
So some people looking at it from the outside, they see there have been some high-profile departures. Probably in the highest profile was Marion Gruber and Phil Krause, who headed vaccines, and there was a suggestion that was because there was a difficulty in adjudicating scientific disagreements, and people felt that they had to leave. I know you may not want to talk about the exact situation, but what's your response to that perception that people have in looking at it from the outside?
Yeah, I think it would be absurd to say that there aren't scientific disagreements at the agency, because there always are, and there should be, because we do have differences of opinion, and we try to settle those differences of opinion amicably. And I think that there's more than meets the eye to what may have caused some people to depart the agency. There have been a variety of forces over the past years, some of which you've already alluded to, which is that besides having scientific controversy, it's just been a stressful time for all of us. The socio-political climate that we're all living in has been challenging, and on top of that, it has been exhausting. We've had 3 years of when we had quite a lot of throughput, be it initially the vaccine development, then vaccine approvals, and then the backlog. So, I still feel very strongly that we've had the individuals who have departed the agencies. I have nothing but really good things to say about them, because they contributed tremendously to rising to the public health emergency and to addressing it. And each person has their own reasons why, having been through the external stressors and yes, the internal stressors of having the dialogue back and forth, and dealing with all of the various forces in our orbit that they have to deal with, that they may have come to a decision that they needed to move on. So no hard feelings, but I think this is something that that reflects a totality of not just, a disagreement about something, but at least in my mind, has to do with the larger totality of what's been going on.
So FDA's success is predicated on its ability to recruit, retain, and advance people, and excellent people. How are you doing at CBER? Over the last 6 months, a year, in terms of recruiting people, retaining people?
So we're actually making some excellent progress. And I think one of the really great things is that we've managed to start to recruit some really great, more senior people. And that's really important because really good managers help attract people to the agency. And we have started to attract some really great young talent. I think if you look our Office of Vaccines and now our Office of the Office of Therapeutic Products, starting to attract some really great young talented individuals who are going to be able to grow with into their positions and really help us, I think, bring on the kind of forward-leaning work that we're going to need to do as we see new generations of vaccines and an increasing wave of gene therapies come through. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think, I'll use this pitch to say that working at the agency is a really exciting place if you're really interested in the science of that's behind either vaccines or gene therapies, or for that matter, the blood products that we regulate, because we get to see the entire spectrum of products and get to see all aspects of this. Not that we can go out and talk about them always, but that intellectually it's incredibly stimulating and it's impactful.
Well, and you know what, we're going to have to take a break now. And when we get back, actually, I want to talk to you exactly about that, where you see the future of gene and cell therapy going, what you're doing to try to make that future better. So we'll be back in just a moment.
Emerging biopharma companies in the US, Europe, and Asia face the same dilemma. How do you globalize to deliver innovation to patients and reward investors? A handful of biopharma companies will build global operations. Most will achieve global economics through partnering and licensing. Others will capture a share of the economics by enabling global development and financings. This October in Kendall Square, BioCentury and Bayhelix once again bring together decision makers and investors to address these industry challenges and to form trusted cross-border relationships. Register today at biocenturyeastwest.com.
I'm back with Dr. Peter Marks, the director of CBER, and I want to pick up where we left off there about the future of gene therapy. I have to say we're talking on Wednesday, May the 10th. The advisory committee meeting for Sarepta's gene therapy is going to be on Friday, and obviously we can't talk about something like that while it's still pending. But in a general basis, you've been on record as saying that you think that greater use of accelerated approval is important for gene therapy. Why do you think that? And what do you think needs to happen to make the accelerated approval pathway something that can move gene therapies into the community more quickly?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And it may take me a moment to kind of lay this out. But one of the things I think we have to realize is that for gene therapy is often today addressing disorders that affect tens or even at most 100 or 200 people in the United States, if not the entire globe. So gene therapy is really trying to address problems in small numbers of individuals, often in diseases for which there is no other therapy that is going to be applicable. No one's going to find a small molecule or a protein therapy, either because it's just too hard to do so or because you simply can't do so. So we're dealing with essentially the last line of defense, gene therapy, for small numbers of individuals. And that requires us, I think, to think creatively about how we can potentially bring therapeutics to these individuals who have no alternative in as rapid a manner as we can, in the most scientific manner that we can. Now, one of the nice things about gene therapies is they are, after all, a targeted therapy. Hopefully, when you're developing a gene therapy, you understand something about the protein that you are trying to either replace or get rid of. And you hopefully understand whether you've got too much of it or too little of it, where the right amount is. And provided you have that understanding, you then can use either animal models or natural experiments, that is, humans who might have more or less of that protein, to be able to figure out what the right level is to achieve with your gene therapy. Well, what I've just set up for you is is what you need to be able to have something that might be reasonably likely to predict whether a therapeutic will be effective. And that's what our accelerated approval standard is. Now, granted, there is going to be some uncertainty here. But what we're talking about is uncertainty for small populations for which there really aren't alternative treatments. And to me, that sets us up in a very reasonable place to take a provision that was given to us by Congress to try to get these therapies to people who have life-threatening diseases. We're not talking about using this for conditions that have other alternative treatments. We're not talking about using this for mild conditions. We're talking about using this for conditions which either take people's lives early on or in their younger years, or that essentially leave them debilitated or on a downward course such that they are severely debilitated. So these are things that are desperately crying out for treatments. And I think this is exactly why we have these provisions. Granted, we could take another day and talk about accelerated approval for larger populations, but here in this particular case, I think we have to ask ourselves, is it acceptable to occasionally make the error of giving something an accelerated approval for which we won't be able to show a confirmatory effect in a trial down the road because there aren't enough patients or because of the nature of what we're doing? And I think as long as the large majority of the time, 95% of the time, we're getting to that correct endpoint of being able to confirm this, then we're doing a good job. And then we're doing the right thing here, because it means that we aren't leaving behind people suffering who could have been treated. So again, this is a little bit like surgeons who take out some extra appendixes that are normal. If they're not doing that, they're not doing their jobs in terms of making sure they prevent complications. Here, yeah. It's a little bit like thinking how we can do.
But there are some differences, right? So one of the differences is for many gene therapies, there's a sense that it's not going to be possible to redose these people, or it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. There are more than one. Maybe there's more than one gene therapy that's in a pipeline. If something gets accelerated approval and it turns out to be not as effective or not as durable as something else, somebody might get that and they've lost their chance, right? So that's a different kind of risk.
And this is a very good point. But that goes into our risk calculus as we're thinking about this, because for many of these products, there is going to, for these very small populations, the commercial interest is not there. And so there's generally going to be one thing for it. I think when you broaden this to the case like you're bringing up, where there might be multiple products competing, you're generally talking about larger products. And then I do think you have to take into account exactly what you're bringing into the discussion here, that you do have to think a little bit more about the benefit, risks, and uncertainties in a different way. Because there, yes, you might have be thinking about whether something could be a better generation that you could have very shortly after one that you're seeing. So I totally take your point here, but for many of the products we're talking about, there's going to be a lonely, they're going to be lonely, and that there will be only one product in development. Once you start to have multiple ones, then it gets more complicated. And I guess to go back to something that I won't discuss in more detail is I think that's the case that you start to get into when you see a Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, where you have multiple sponsors, but it's a larger rare disease than we're dealing with than many of the rare diseases that I'm talking about.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I'm wondering, because we see this also as outsiders, you see the advisory committee meetings, and sometimes you see a situation where it seems that the data is saying one thing, and FDA scientists reviewing the data say it says one thing, perhaps that something's not effective, and then you see patients saying something different, right? And there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of obviously a great deal of empathy for those patients. How do you adjudicate between an apparent difference in the views between a hard and fast look at the data and what patients are saying right in front of people?
Yeah. So ultimately, we really care about what patients think, but we do have to follow where the science takes us. Because unfortunately, as a physician, I've been there myself, and I've been down the garden path myself, thinking that something worked, and then unfortunately found out from studies later on that it really wasn't working. I would have at the time said, Steve, it's definitely working. It's absolutely working. And unfortunately, it may have looked like it was working because in that particular situation, it might have been working. But when you looked over at the larger trials, it really wasn't working. And so I think we are going to have to follow the science, and we're going to have to follow our commitment to the patients that if we don't get there with a given product, that we will have the commitment to keep with it till we get it right. And I think, that's something that I just want to circle back to where we started in the pandemic. It's something that we learned we sometimes have to do. I mean, look at convalescent plasma, where maybe we didn't fully get it right at the beginning, but we stuck with it. And at the end of the day, I think we have gotten it right. And I think we're better for it, ready for the next pandemic when it occurs. So I think this is an important place.
We could have a whole nother conversation about that. I'm not sure that, I don't know how many 100,000 people got exposed to convalescent plasma and probably didn't benefit from it. I'm not sure if that was getting it right, but
I don't disagree with you, but that's part of the learning that came from that anyway.
So another part of the learning, I think, if you look at the controversies that FDA's had around accelerated approval, it seems to me that in almost every instance, it's the same thing, which is that FDA's made a decision about a surrogate endpoint, and there hasn't been public scientific consensus about that endpoint before they've made the decision. And I'm wondering why that happens. Wouldn't it be better if you, and it has happened in some cases, where there's a public debate among scientists and physicians in the patient community about whether something is an appropriate endpoint to grant accelerated approval, independent of the product, before we start making decisions about specific products?
It's a great question. And that's why we have, in some cases, we have validated surrogates, right? That debate has occurred before, but then we have companies that are allowed to, and I don't think we want to stop this. They develop a surrogate that is reasonably likely to predict that is their own marker. It is hard to have, sometimes hard to have a conversation about those because in some cases they are proprietary. In some cases, they move through the process right along with the product. In some cases, it's because of the complexity of having clinical endpoints and those biomarkers mixed in with one of them. I don't disagree that maybe there could be more thought given to how we can think about that. And it's something to go back. I always learn something when I do interviews. This is one to go back with me to think about more as we prepare for future challenges that come down the pike at us.
So you've said a few times that you think there should be, or maybe you are, creating Operation Warp Speed for rare diseases. What's the idea?
So the idea here is to take one of the best things to come out of the vaccine development programs was to show how you can speed things up remarkably. And it's not through any brilliance, it's just through something that should make sense, which is that if you don't have long pauses between when someone asks a question and FDA gives them an answer to that question, you can shorten development times. And so the idea of Operation Warp Speed for rare diseases, the pilot that we want to perform in order to convince others that this makes sense to do on a larger scale, is to say, okay, we have a promising gene therapy that may have just treated its first couple of patients. How can we get that across the finish line to an approved product most rapidly? And if we can, instead of having to have type C meetings, which require 75 days between when the request is put in and when the meeting might occur, to have the question asked and answered in a week's time or less. And if you do that multiple times, right, because over the course of a development program, you can have anywhere from 5 to 10 different meetings. If you essentially take out all of that essentially dead space, could you compress the development time and get things across the finish line more quickly? And because you're not having small companies burning cash while they're waiting, they'll have more money to invest in actually developing products. So that's the theory behind this. And I think we have to see whether by doing a pilot, this plays out. And I think this is a great example of where we'll be interested in seeing whether both stakeholders, whether it makes sense to FDA that it's working from a resource perspective, but also it's going to be very important to make sure that the people developing products are feeling like it's working as well, and that we have objective evidence that things are actually getting there faster.
So you said you're thinking about a pilot. What's the actual status of this?
So the actual status is we're putting together the parameters because we want to make sure that when we put this, there are a lot of people that might want to participate, and I would look to this fall to see us announce a Federal Register notice of inviting applications for that pilot. I could be a little sooner, but my guess is it'll be this fall that you'll see the notice.
So one other thing that's coming up, I think fairly soon, the law that the budget bill, the omnibus budget bill that passed last year at the end of the year, created a pathway for platform approvals. And when I talk to people about it, the kind of poster child for how it might work is in gene therapy. Can you talk, and maybe even in cell therapies, can you talk about how you're thinking about what is a platform and how it might actually play out in practice?
Yeah, so I think for gene therapies, they may turn out to be a really nice paradigm for this platform therapy, because you can imagine that for a given our common vector that we're using now, adeno-associated viral vectors, for a given type of serotype of those, you might be able to put different types of inserts that might get several different related diseases, or for that matter, unrelated diseases, and use the exact same manufacturing process for all of those. Well, that means if you can leverage this kind of platform technology approach, you don't have to redo all of the toxicology and the manufacturing information that goes there. And you can just focus on the difference in that insert that's specific to the disease you're trying to treat. That allows you to move on more rapidly to getting the clinical information that you'd like about that product. So I think if this works well, you could imagine that you could have classes of products whereby you would have a well-defined first and second member of that class, perhaps, that then allows you to move on to move quickly through making additional members of that class. And because they're all related, it actually has an additional benefit, which is that if you make an improvement in the initial product, it can cascade through all the others in terms of a manufacturing improvement. So I think there's a lot to be potentially benefited here. And I think we're going to look forward to taking this one out for a spin as soon as we can in the gene therapy world, because I think it does have a lot of potential here.
And the platforms the platform approvals are going to be specific to a company, right? So it's not just across all, say, AAV vectors.
Right. And I think the point here, just so that people don't think we're just unnecessarily limiting things, is that, different companies have their own, right now in the world of gene therapy manufacturing, most companies have their own secret sauce about how they make a gene therapy. And so unfortunately, we can't just say, oh, AV9 as a platform or AV8 as a platform is good to go. It has to be a given company's platform that they will use with their manufacturing technology. We're still not far enough advanced in the manufacturing area to be able to say that you can go across different manufacturers, because we just don't have enough uniformity of manufacture.
So I've actually gone over the time that we're supposed to have for this interview, and I'm imposing on your day. But I just have one final question, which is really looking forward, looking at gene therapies, at cell therapies, at vaccines. Looking forward for the next year or 2 years. You said before that you get to see everything in its early stages. What's exciting to you? What's your vision? What do you think we're gonna, when we have this interview, hopefully in a year or 2 years or 3 years, what's going to be different? How are patients going to have benefited in big ways from these technologies?
Yeah, so I hope on the gene therapy, since we're talking about gene therapy, I hope on the gene therapy end, we're able to accelerate the pace in which we get these very rare disease gene therapies, what I would consider the no-brainers, the ones for which there is only one gene therapy in development for a small number of people with a life-limiting disease, that we can start getting those over the finish line, and that we start to see moms and dads of children with these rare diseases feeling like their needs are being addressed, because we really are making a difference in the clinical outcomes. And so I'd like to see that as something we're going to see in the next 2 or 3 years. I think that's on the small scale of rare. And on the larger scale of us as a population, my hope is that by doing our job well in terms of making sure we do good selections of the current generation of vaccines and the future generation of vaccines that address, for this matter, SARS coronavirus 2 as COVID-19, that we're able to protect more of the population because we get more trust in our messaging, because we've done our scientific due diligence. So I'm hoping that we save more lives, both in the large and in the small.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I actually want to have a whole nother conversation with you about that issue of trust and how you build that up, but we have to do that another time. And thanks to all of you for watching.
Thank you so much for having me today.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the second BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit. Join us October 2nd to 4th in Kendall Square to debate how to globalize biopharma innovation to benefit patients and achieve an ROI for investors.